So I'm Kathy Gaw, and I'm very privileged to be able to interview Dr. David Hayes today, April 13th, 2013. And David, not only have you been a steadfast legislative and professional mentor to me, but you've also mentored many psychologists who've moved into leadership positions with the Ohio Psychological and American Psychological Associations. You've served in various key and leadership positions on the board of directors for the Ohio Psychological Association over the last 24 years. You've participated in the American Psychological Association State Leadership Conference in various leadership and federal advocacy positions over 20 years, as well as participated on APA's Council of Representatives representing Ohio. And APA awarded you the Carl F. Heiser Award in 1994 for your work on Ohio's hospital privileging bill. You've also prepared and presented testimony for the State House and Senate committees regarding a number of issues related to patient protection, scope of practice in psychology, sexual misconduct by therapists, mental health parity, and human rights. Today I'd like to interview you in regard to your experience with and observations of the governance structure and organization of OPA over the years, as well as your involvement in advocacy for psychology within the state and nationally.
Great.
So in the next 20 minutes. No. And so how did you start with your interest in just kind of organizational association operations and advocacy and those kinds of areas that aren't necessarily something that a psychologist would gravitate to at the beginning of their career?
Sure, and in fact, I didn't realize I had any interest in those things at all.
Interesting.
I had done a postdoc in Kansas and come to work at Harding Hospital in a Columbus suburb in Worthington. And one of the psychologists on the staff there was Russ Newman. That was Russ Newman before he was Russ Newman of APA.
Interesting.
He was, and I'll tell you Russ Newman's story in a little bit, but,
okay.
which does link back to OPA. But I don't even think I was a member of OPA at that point. So that piece of my thinking about and understanding of what professional identity is and how one engages with one's colleagues and so on was almost entirely undeveloped at that point. So we used to have weekly staff meetings. Russ would be at those, and from time to time he would say something about the Ohio Psychological Association, which I primarily just ignored. One does ignore things at some staff meetings, right? And that was when Henry Saman was basically the central office of OPA. And there was a piece of legislation of which I was quite unaware that would that would end discrimination against psychologists with regard to hospital privileges and admitting privileges. And the way OPA worked back then, and it still works that way, I think, to some degree, is the powers that be, which would be Henry mostly at that point, would have some kind of need in mind, and he would tap his vast network of connections and resources and so on. So he was a newspaper man before.
Oh,
you probably
perfect.
know that already. And so in this instance, hospital privileges, he talked to Russ and said, Russ, go ask David Hayes if he would be willing to chair the hospital privileges committee. And my initial response was, I don't know anything about this. I'm plenty busy. I had a different thought about myself professionally than I'm going to go join OPA and do advocacy work. I had no idea what it was. But I said, and honestly, thinking back, I'm not sure why. Sure, I'll do it. I think I got my arm twisted pretty hard because I didn't really have an idea what it would entail. So got on that committee, attended my first OPA board meeting, which back in that day was very formal. I think there were 7 meetings a year, and they involved committee meetings the night before, and the men wore jackets and ties, and the women wore dresses or skirts, or dressed professionally at least. And the first board meeting, we went around the room and said, what was our committee working on? And did we have some ideas about what we were going to do? And so I tried to, I didn't do what I would have done now, which is to say, this is brand new to me. I'm in listening mode and trying to understand what might be needed. And so I'm hoping that you'll all point me in the right directions. I made something up instead, like, we should do a survey, and somebody promptly said, we've done that already, we need to do that.
Okay.
So I felt a little bit chastened, but it was a pretty imposing, intimidating room to me at that point. So what actually happened was I was paired up with John Corrigan, who was the legislative chair. I think it was the legislative committee. Actually, it was committee of one for the longest time. And we started poking around, seeing who the opponents were to the hospital privileges bill, which was sponsored by the relatively new Ohio Representative Ray Miller, who later became a lobbyist for us for a while. But when he introduced the hospital privileges bill, behind the scenes he had said to us and said to the OSMA, which is the Ohio State Medical Association, who were opposed to this change on the usual turf grounds and expansion of scope of practice grounds and so on. Representative Miller said to them, everybody has to lose on some things. You guys win on a lot of things. You're going to lose on this one. And then when he introduced his bill to the committee, the sponsor testimony is first, he gave this stirring, fiery speech about discrimination and slavery, and he really was revved up. Everybody was like, whoa.
And then you were inspired too.
Right? And so John Corrigan and I gave testimony. I'd never given testimony before. Our lobbyist at that point, a woman by the name of Anne Marie Turgan, sort of coached me through it, how one does that, and it was useful. And some point in that process, John wasn't able to attend, and so I was going to have to go give testimony by myself.
Oh my!
This was out of the blue. John had some conflict or emergency or something that had arisen, and Anne Marie said, "Well, I know. I'll call up my buddy Ted Strickland." So this was before Ted had become a congressman and the governor and so on, but he had had some elective office. And also I didn't realize that John and Ted were good friends. They had spent a lot of time together out of some things that simply brought them together, and so they knew each other. And Ted knew nothing about the bill, stepped right up and gave great testimony. And the long and short of it was, we testified on the House side, it got reported out of committee, it passed the House, we testified on the Senate side, at which point John's wife said something like, "So glad for you to get out of the House every once in a while, John." I think we had tried a while. And it was enacted. And Governor Voinovich, governor at the time, signed it. I have a picture, actually. Anne Marie, this being the first piece of legislation that she had successfully gotten enacted in her gig with OPA, had a couple of photos, framed them up, and that framed set of a couple of photos is now down at Central Office.
Nice.
It says House Bill 119, and when it was enacted. One is the signing ceremony with John and the governor and I and Representative Miller, Ray Miller. And the other one, I think was John and Ray and I, maybe Anne Marie, on the steps of the State House.
Nice.
So what happened as a result of that was I really got the bug. It was so much fun. It was so interesting to see the way the legislative process really works. Part of what I've had a chance to do when I've had an opportunity to mentor other people and get them involved and engaged and so on is to first disabuse them of the idea that the way laws get made is what you learn in civics class, because it really doesn't look exactly like that. So that was my first taste of that. What people said to me was that I seemed to be effective in giving testimony. I had that role seemed to fit me okay. So that's something that also was fun. I mean, it really is so much different than what a psychologist does as a psychotherapist, or at least the kind of psychotherapist I am, which is I sit and listen a lot. And this was a totally different arena in which I had a chance to speak out about things that I thought were important for psychology as a profession, and important for the people that we serve. But also then there's the next step. You give testimony, and then the questions come. Sometimes there are no questions, but sometimes there are hard questions or unexpected questions. And so the chance to sort of think on one's feet and improvise a little bit, played to a side of me that I didn't realize was there in some measure, and I really enjoyed that. So that got me going. You know, I also thought, as you were introducing this idea about my having had a chance to mentor people, that what got me started was there were people who mentored me. I think there's a very long and important tradition in OPA, and I think most organizations like this that are successful and healthy, that you bring in new people, or you bring in people that you think might have something to offer, you see some potential, and you help them. And I got that from Russ, and I got that from Henry Seaman, and I got that from Anne Marie, and I got that from John Corrigan. And there were a whole raft of more senior OPA people, some of whom were from around here, some of whom were up in the Cleveland area. And that group of people encouraged me to get involved in leadership stuff. And I can easily recall what it feels like to have somebody say, you know, we'd like you to get more involved. And that stuck with me, and I've had a chance to say that to a lot of other people. And typically that's what happens. It feels good when somebody says, we like what you offer, we think you would be a great fit, we think you would be an important addition to this group of leaders or this group of advocates.
Yes.
Oh,
that's wonderful.
So what else?
So that would have been what was the year that had been enacted? Do you remember?
House Bill 119 was enacted during the 119th General Assembly, so we thought that was a good omen. So that was 1991.
Okay.
And what Anne Marie taught me next was getting a bill passed is only part of the story. The enabling rule writing process then that has to happen, and moving out there and getting something to be done with the bill is the next step. So we spent a couple of years, executive director and I and others, on the road, doing road trips, going to the regional psych associations and saying, here's what the bill was, here's what it does, and trying to spread the word about that. So the other piece you asked about, though, not the advocacy piece, was the governance piece. And having gotten pretty quickly into the group of people who were involved in OPA governance, I got exposed to that. And looking back, it was a pretty unwieldy, clunky kind of governance structure, in the sense that I think at one point we counted up 42 people at board meetings. With votes, and it's hard to get anything done with a handful of psychologists in a room, never mind 42. But we know from research that 42 is not the right size for a work group. And when you buy food for everybody, and we got pretty good food at those meetings, as I recall, too, and we were at hotels. And
it sounds like Friday and Saturday.
Right.
Wow.
That ended up to be fairly costly. So I got kind of interested in, well, how is this working, and how might it work better? And I was president of OPA somewhere early on around then, and so I had a chance firsthand to see the way the governance structure as it existed worked well, and what some of the drawbacks were. One of the features of the way OPA was set up at that point was the president appointed a great number of the board members.
Ah.
So he or she had a lot of say, sort of from the perspective of the president appoints his cabinet for the United States. Well, the president appoints his board at OPA. And so we were going through, that would have been a time when managed care as a development in the insurance industry was really just gaining ascendancy. And there were lots of, I was going to say fights, arguments, discussions, debates about this was good or that was good. I mean, that was the time of Bidine and Nick Cummings and lots of people saying managed care is the wave of the future. Let's have a psychologist run, a psychologist-driven managed care. We can do it better. But the aspects of managed care that are problematic for psychotherapists or psychologists providing a lot of kinds of care were already in place, which is limitations and somebody looking over your shoulder and saying yes or no about a treatment plan. Sometimes somebody with a computer screen and a high school education looking over your shoulder at a screen and saying, no, you can't do that. So one result of the really quite lively debate in the professional community in Ohio, and it was true elsewhere too, was that the managed care folks decided that they would run their own candidate for president of OPA. And the alarming thought was,
interesting,
if the president, since the president appoints his or her board, the managed care folks would have been able to take over OPA from the inside. At least that was the way we thought about it, imagined it, worried about it. And we succeeded at that juncture in making sure that our candidate, as opposed to the managed care candidate, did get elected. But there was lots of campaigning. And in the wake of that, some of us thought, you know, there ought to be some kind of structural fix or sometimes structural response that we could make so that we wouldn't have to operate in the shadow of this specter of some organization whose plans might be inimical to what OPA tries to stand for could come in. It doesn't have to just be a managed care organization. That was the immediate worry.
Interesting.
And so a few of us put our heads together, thought about how can we change things so that we've got the right set of checks and balances in place so that the president does have some opportunity to pick some board members. Some are already elected to the board. That way the president and the president-elect and the past president and the finance officer and then the APA council rep, that was still in place. So there was that handful of people who were elected by the membership. But the thought was, how can we make that sturdier? And primarily the work was, Sandy Shulman and I used to work a lot together. Vanessa Jensen and I used to work a lot together. So the three of us got together and kind of put our heads, thought through some of those things. Sandy has a lot of organizational experience and savvy, more than I think Vanessa and I had at that point. So we picked her brain a little bit, but I think we somehow got on that track, Vanessa and I, and worked hard and developed a plan which later got called the Jensen-Hayes plan or the Hayes-Jensen plan, or it depends on who tells it, I suppose. I would call it the Jensen-Hayes plan because I think her contributions about how you set that up were important. And she and I then worked to start the process of persuading people that that was a useful and, in fact, a necessary change. It was useful also in the sense that it went in the direction of making the board smaller. So the board, as it exists right now, is a product of that change in the bylaws and the rules and regs that we formulated and then got through, first of all, the executive committee and then the board and then the vote by the membership, which is necessary to change bylaws or rules and regs. It was a difficult time in the sense that what happens when you make a group smaller is some people lose their spots. People understand that, or they feel disenfranchised, or both.
Yes.
It's not like you're in a job and you've got a team that needs to get smaller and you can let attrition have its impact, because people really weren't going away, and so there were I think there was a lot of heartache. I was going to say there were bruised egos. I think that's true. I think there were people that felt that the decisions that got made somehow failed to consider what else was important. When one tries to get to the point of saying, okay, we're going to have now 10 committee chairs, 10 standing committees who will be represented and have a vote on the board, the people who aren't inside that 10 feel like their value is not understood or acknowledged, or feel angry and so on. And so one of the groups that was left out was the group of psychologists who work in the public sector. Okay. And I can guarantee you, as being on the inside of those discussions, that there was never any sense that group doesn't do something valuable and important. There was never a wish or an intent to say, we don't think that's really the important part of what OPA does. But there was this, well, you can't really have an organization like this and not have a science committee, because how's that going to look if you're not science-based? And, well, we got to have ethics. And pretty soon the list got long enough that it's like, okay, I'll trade you this for that. And we at that point, the three of us, Sandy and Vanessa and I, made the best calls we can, and we could. And one of those calls was that public sector group ended up not having a vote. And I think they had finally gotten a vote. I don't remember the detail of that exactly. They had finally gotten it, and then it felt like it was taken away from them. I think also that was a time when we were talking a lot about LGBT issues.
Okay.
And so the LGBT committee had been formed, I think, initially as a task force. My timing might be a little bit wrong about this, but that was one of the things as well. And there was a feeling by the people who were involved there and who were very passionate about that, the issues that relate to LGBT patients, psychologists, membership, representation, influence, and voice, that they needed a vote too. And I think that got folded in under diversity in a way that felt disenfranchising to some people, or felt devaluing in some way. Again, never an intent, but it's those. There were some very, you and I were at a workshop yesterday where the idea of difficult conversations arose. Yes. Well, there were some difficult conversations, many that took place around that time. And one of the things that I got to do, because I was involved in all this, and I think I might have been president, or I was on the executive committee for some reason at that point, is I got sent to the public sector meeting where they get together as an emissary / sacrificial lamb, I think, to go
see if he can live through this.
To go and spread some oil on the water to try to really from all facetiousness aside. To go and say, here's how we were thinking about this, to try to make sure that it was said, and we said it repeatedly, we didn't intend any kind of devaluing or disrespect, and so trying to figure out how to make that work. So fast forward later, this issue continued to arise over the course of, so I'm not sure when those changes were made. They would have been...
I can look it up here, I think. I would say, now you said that would have been after you were OPA president, is that?
Right, so it would have been in the mid-90s, maybe the late 90s even.
Yeah. 93, 94 was when you were president.
Okay, so I was, yeah, so it would be a little bit after that.
Policy and Planning Committee, was that involved in the restructuring?
That was a whole different thing.
Okay.
Right. So in any event, from the mid to late 90s up until fairly recently, the discussions with anytime the group of public sector psychologists got together, it wasn't very long before that issue that was still painful would arise. How come we don't have a vote? And so I was still committed to the idea, and I think some other people were too, that we needed to address that and wanted to address that and find some ways to repair that and get them a voting representative seat on the board. Now, this is against the backdrop of the argument that we made back then, and I believe is really in fact true, that a vote, while it is symbolic, at a place at the table, belonging, is not the way decisions get made at OPA generally. When we had the group of 42, what would happen is we would just discuss something until we all were worn down, but we had all reached consensus. It was really a group that operated on consensus, and largely it continues to do that. And implicit in that is being able to raise your hand and say, I vote yes, I vote no, is much less important than being able to speak persuasively about your perspective about something. So if you've got a good argument, if you've got an idea that makes sense, and you can talk about it in a way that causes other people to say, that's a good idea, it makes sense, then that's far more powerful than having a vote. So we got to a point, this is when Kathy McDaniels Wilson is now president.
Okay.
She followed me the second time I was president.
That's right. So that would have been 2007, I think.
Right.
I think
So she and I are sitting next to each other at a meeting that had to do with BWC in some way or another. I don't remember.
Bureau of Workers' Comp.
Right, the Bureau of Workers' Comp, and I don't remember how I got dragooned into being at that meeting. It's not something I know very much about, but I was there. And among other people, Fred Fries was there.
Ah.
And Fred, in his way, went off on a long disquisition about the vote and public sector psychologists not being respected. And this one's on me. I'm sitting next to Kathy, and I couldn't remember the 10 standing committees. And so I was writing them down and trying to get them. And I thought I had a brilliant idea. It looked like we had room for one more committee slot. I don't know how in the world I came up with this. And so I said, Kathy, we can solve this.
Oh, no.
And so I spoke up. I said, we're going to solve this. I make my commitment to you that you will get your vote. And then I went back and looked at my rules and regs, and I don't know what universe I was operating in, but somebody was going to have to lose a vote. And I was at that point, or maybe shortly after that, the chair of the advocacy committee. And so I said, look, I've made this argument a bunch of times. It's not the vote, it's if you've got something to say that's persuasive, that's a good idea. And so advocacy committee, if we all can agree about this, because the way the rules and regs are set up, the board of directors decides what are the 10 standing committees. So the board can change that up. If you all will buy this, it's time the public sector committee chooses its own name and has a vote. And to facilitate that, as chair of advocacy, I propose that we do away with the advocacy committee's vote. It's no longer a standing committee. We're going to do advocacy work anyway, whether it's a voting position on the board or not. Everybody thought it over for a while. Said, okay, that we can go with that. So Kathy and I got that done. And again, I don't know what got into my head on that day to count wrong. But I think that was a good outcome. Mm-hmm. Ironically, I'm not chair of advocacy anymore. Mm-hmm. Now the same feeling in advocacy is, how come we don't have a vote? So those issues about governance haven't entirely gone away.
Yes.
The other piece of governance that captured my attention was when I was a member of the Council of Representatives. Mm-hmm. There was a brief period when Ohio had two council reps, because there's a complicated formula about how votes are allotted to divisions and states, and back then there were more votes allotted to state, provincial and territorial psych associations than is currently the case percentage-wise, and absolute numbers. So Sandy Shulman and I were both council reps at the same time for a little bit, and then she rotated off, and Ohio lost one of its seats. So then I was on. But part of what was very interesting is to see a group of, 165 or so psychologists, very smart psychologists, in a room doing business in a structure that was set up to be like the Congress of the United States.
Oh my. And we see how well that's working right now.
Unwieldy barely captures it. But along with the work that we all did, and the way some of the work got parceled out and sent to boards and committees and caucuses and so on. Mm-hmm. And so the work of advocacy there was really advocacy within council as well, to get things done, or to sidetrack and derail things and so on, because of course there are constituencies in a body that large as well. One of the most interesting things, one of the parlor game that I played with myself, was to think, okay, so who's going to go to the mic next, and which position are they going to take? And so you start to understand something about how organizations, big and little, work in that regard too. So been all of the landscape here, but you asked about my interest in governance and structure, and so it grew in those ways, and then it grew additionally from working in a hospital, which is an organization of its own. I worked in a hospital in which there was an ongoing fight, often spearheaded by Dr. Newman, to ask the secretary of the medical director to please refer to psychologists as doctor, or to put their PhD or PsyD after their name, because out of that office, the executive administrative assistant gave the title doctor to the physicians, nobody else.
Oh my!
So it was a very hierarchical, medically chauvinistic place in a way. Mm-hmm. So to see that side of how organizations work was interesting as well.
Yes.
So.
And then later you were involved in some state legislation regarding scope of practice.
Sure, I'll tell you that. Let me tell you my Russ Newman story.
Okay.
So I had a woman who used to cut my hair at that point, and she was out that way. I guess that doesn't matter so much. And we were chatting in the way one does when you get a haircut. And this woman said that her husband was in law school. And I said, oh, where's he going? He was going to Capital. Capital has a program for people who already have jobs. So it's a night or weekends or something like that. And Russ Newman, at that point, had decided to go to law school, so he was in law school as well. And I asked my hair cutter how her husband liked law school. She said, it's really interesting. He comes with all these kind of stories. I says, well, like what? He said, there's this one guy in one of his classes who asks these really long, complicated questions and then answers them himself.
I know that guy.
I know that guy. And so I was dying for a chance to use that story, because Russ and I had some history. And so finally, at one point, when Russ was now the executive director of the practice directorate
of APA,
he came to OPA for the convention, and I had a chance to introduce him. So I said, Russ, I'm going to tell a story on you. And so I told this, and he did not miss a beat. He said, they teach us in law school never to ask a question you don't know the answer to. So that's my Russ story.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And I did not realize I became involved in OPA, I think shortly before that convention, and so I knew Russ as being involved with the practice directorate, and I did not realize that he had originally been practicing in Ohio.
Right, yeah. So where did he, Clark University, I think, was his undergraduate, and then his graduate degree was in Case, maybe, or somewhere in Ohio.
Okay.
And so I don't know the story of how he ended up at Harding, but when I came to interview at Harding, because the director of psychology had been a postdoc at Menninger's, which is where I was, and that's why I knew about Harding, that's why I came.
Okay.
He was a psychologist on one of the adolescent units. So he was the unit psychologist.
Interesting.
For a while.
Interesting.
And then gradually, once he had finished his law degree, went to a sort of a bigger arena. And he was the assistant executive director, deputy executive director, or something like that, behind Bryant Welch. Who was the first executive director of practice. Maybe not the. No, I think that's right.
Okay.
So Bryant Welch was the
Okay.
and who's also a psychologist, JD. I think he's Harvard Law, in fact.
Okay.
And now has done a lot of legal representation. In fact, he represented the psychoanalysts who sued the American Psychoanalytic Association for not letting anybody besides physicians train for clinical psychoanalytic practice. There was this dodge that used to happen. It was a sort of pretend thing. Psychologists could not get psychoanalytic training, the actual training, unless they were willing to say they were only doing it for research purposes. And so they would have to say this lie so that they could get the training and then become psychoanalysts. And so Bryant Welch's suit on behalf of 4 psychologists, one of whom I knew from Menninger's, was successful. So that opened up the training of the American.
Very interesting. And would that have been of the same era of hospital privileges and some of those things?
Just a little bit later. Yeah.
Okay.
So that would have been mid to late 90s, I think.
Okay.
Right. So some of the scope of practice stuff. So once you get involved in advocacy, there's no shortage of stuff to work on.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was driven from OPA side. We had an idea, we wanted to accomplish this. So that was it. With the managed care stuff, there were lots of efforts to regulate and rein in some of the excesses or the more egregious practices.
Okay.
Think patient bill of rights, that kind of stuff. And so some of that work was being done at the federal level. Some of it we were trying to do at the state level. And Sandy Shulman and I, working with Ray Miller again, had a bill introduced on behalf of OPA, a kind of patient's bill of rights in Ohio. And we got it through one of the houses before we had the biggest slapdown that we had experienced. I mean,
oh my goodness.
We had a chance to be at a meeting with the bigs. And it's like, this is like the kids being at the grown-ups table too. Because these were the big players, the heavy hitters from the insurance companies. So the very well-funded folks who were extremely well-connected in the General Assembly. And it was very clear to anybody who could understand these things that this was going nowhere. I mean, so there was this sort of pro forma meeting, but it was...
Oh no!
Yeah, so that's about how far that went. And
so much for patient rights.
That was a wake-up call. I mean, that was an opportunity to see another version of how these things work. I mean, I was fresh off we got hospital privileges. There are lots of people at the national level who are saying insurance companies are doing some things that aren't right, and surely people will stand up for the right things. And so much.
Yeah.
It's more complicated than that,
Yes.
the way I came away with that. So there were some things that came from OPA. We think this is a good change. Let's try to get this law enacted. But more typically, OPA was in response mode as well, reactive mode.
Okay.
So the master's prepared psychologists or the people with masters in psychology in Ohio decide that they ought to be licensed too. And APA has a posture. Psychology is a doctoral level profession.
Okay.
OPA is in line with that. So we have to go and testify about why it's not a good idea for people who have a master's degree to be licensed as psychologists. There are other licenses they can get. If they want to become a psychologist, that's fine. Go to graduate school, do what you need to do. So that was one of them.
Okay.
The counselors wanted to be independently licensed.
Ah.
So I give testimony about what seemed to me, from a psychologist's perspective, some of the shortcomings of counselor education relative to psychology education.
Okay.
And went out into the hall at the State House outside the hearing room and was accosted in a very unhappy way by some counselor educators from OSU.
Oh.
And so those were some of my first experiences, that a more powerful experience of the way the turf wars get played out. Because, we say to physicians, we have the capacity and the training and the capability to do these things, and you don't want us to do it because it's a pocketbook issue, or it's an issue of control and hegemony. And we turn around and say, of the social workers and the counselors, you shouldn't be allowed to do this because you're not as well trained as we are, or you're not as something as we are, and you'll hurt people and it's really bad. The same things the physicians say to us about us.
Uh-huh.
And so I think it was reasonable at the end of the day that those changes, counselors are independently licensed with enough of a certain kind of education. Same with marriage and family therapists. That those changes were inevitable, and there was no way we were going to stop them, whether we thought it was right or not, whether we think or still think we do better work or different work than they do. But it was the first time I had that experience of somebody saying, you're talking about me, and you say I don't do good work and we don't provide good training, and how outrageous. And
Wow.
I was a little back on my heels at that point.
Yeah, and since then, have you had the opportunity to work alongside them for any kind of legislation where it's felt like you've been able to be on the same side?
I think one of the things that Michael Ranney, our executive director right now, does very effectively is to work in coalitions. And he is in a number of coalitions, the membership of which changes a little bit according to the issue, where we all work together, we being physicians and social workers and counselors and psychologists and so on, or some of us work together. The physicians are left out because they're going to have a different posture about this. And everybody's as good with that as you can be.
Okay.
But sure, one of the things one learns fairly quickly is the same players stay around in a lot of these issues. And so in politics and in advocacy, you don't want to burn bridges. We're working with Senator Seitz right now on some issues. First time I met Senator Seitz was the lobby room that we used to use used to have a sort of an open house, free food for lobbying clients. And they're close to the State House, so the legislators were invited to come over.
Nice.
And so you go there on the appointed night. The food was great, and you might run into the president of the Senate or any of the legislators who were working on deals or whatever. Drinks were to be had upstairs, and some deals did get made. So the first time I met Senator Seitz was just after DOMA had been passed in Ohio.
Oh my.
And he was I think he was the sponsor. And when I introduced myself as a psychologist, he said something like, "You guys really got beat on that one, didn't you?" And he was just delighted with himself. But around another issue now, we are working very closely with him. And if we did take the position of anybody who would sponsor that kind of legislation, we can't work with you, we'll vilify you, we'll fight against you, then there's no opportunity to work together later. So
Yeah.
I think that's simply one of the lessons of people are complicated, issues are complicated. You can be for this and against that, and you can find common ground about something else, or when you can, that's how a lot of things get accomplished. I do remember that when we were dealing with the master's people who wanted to be licensed as psychologists, I don't know how long we'd had the listserv. I don't remember when that got set up, but we put out the word on our listserv.
Oh boy.
To be in touch with Representative Jamie Callender about this. And Michael and I and maybe somebody else went to visit him. We said, please don't put it on a listserv. He was getting lots of calls. Well, it turned out we won that one. We won that one. But that was an early experience of how effective it could be at that point. I mean, that was before we had all the emails and the things that were set up to make lobbying and advocacy as push button and efficient as it is now sometimes.
Nice.
So yeah, that was an interesting time. So we won that one. We lost the one with counselors and social workers. We lost the one, to our dismay, about marriage and family therapists because it was sponsored by Gene Schmidt, who was nobody's favorite at that point in our group.
And DOMA, as you said,
Right, we lost DOMA.
After some very strong testimony from psychology and OPA.
Yeah. Yes.
And so now the Heiser Award is something that APA awards very select psychologists for work on key legislation for psychology.
The Heiser Award is given by APA. It's now administered, I think, by Division 31, which is the Division of State Psychological, Territorial, Provincial Psychological Associations.
Okay.
So it's the Division of State Psych Associations, basically, like OPA. But it's given to psychologists who have been active in legislative work where legislation affects the practice of psychology.
Oh, okay.
So the reason I got the Heiser for the Hospital Privileges Bill, for example, is that expanded the ability to practice in Ohio for psychologists. And I mean, if you do the math, there aren't that many Heiser Award winners out there. I think there might be 400 maybe at this point, against the whole number of APA members. That's a pretty small group. But the number of Heiser Award winners is growing, which I think is terrific.
Yes.
Because it means that advocacy about the practice of psychology is something that's spreading, being done more effectively in more and more places. One of the really cool things in OPA's Heiser history is that we were the first state association to have a graduate student who received the Heiser Award. She is now a psychologist, Jess Grayson Luzier, and she's in West Virginia. We wouldn't mind tempting her to come back.
Yes.
We all saw her at State Leadership Conference this year, 2013.
Yes.
And so that was the legislation about scope, sequence of training.
Yes.
That we passed here.
And that would have been 5 years ago, so
That sounds about right.
2012, 2011. No, I'm.
So 5 years would be 2008.
That's right. That's right.
Around about.
That's why I'm not a mathematician. Yes. Okay. Yeah, that was very significant. I remember being in an OPA board meeting a couple of years prior to that and having I believe she was either a graduate student or an intern at the time, very tearfully saying to OPA, "You've got to help us because the way the sequence of training is set up right now, it's undoable for, we can't afford to do it. It's difficult with the shortage of internship placements, and OPA was very responsive, and I think worked with APA also, because that was something.
That was a different kind of advocacy process. The set of complications around how does one support graduate students in psychology is fairly large, I think. But APA had done some studies, had looked several times into the question of what was talked about as sequence of training. And what that meant is most jurisdictions, most states, provinces, territories that license psychologists, and part of the trouble is each one has its own separate license, so the requirements in Ohio are Ohio's statutory requirements, and they're different from Illinois and Indiana and Nevada and wherever. Most states, working off an old model that was originally developed at APA by council, said you get your education and then you go and get 2 years of supervised experience, one of which should be postdoctoral, and then you're really ready to be no longer in trainee mode. You're now ready to be a sort of journeyman psychologist, and you're ready to be licensed. The thought was that there would be postdoctoral institutes that would grow up across the country to train psychologists in that one postdoctoral year, and that's when the finishing touches on the professionalization of the student, professional identity, and so on would happen. They'd be ready to go. What happened instead was the model came to be, you got a lot of supervision in at least the strong programs, almost from the beginning of graduate school. You weren't just doing coursework and then you'd get your clinical training. So the clinical training started fairly early on. And so the 2 years of supervised training and a year was how many hours? 1,800 hours or 1,600 hours or 2,000 hours. Certainly, again, depended on what jurisdiction.
Okay.
It started to be more and more the case that graduate students would have acquired 2 years of supervised experience, and sometimes more, sometimes quite a lot more, by the time they graduated. So they were at the point of having had as much clinical training, supervised clinical training, as the original model envisioned, but they couldn't get their license because in most states they were required to get 1 year of that supervision after they got their degree. So the thought was, there's a fix for that. The fix would be, let's take a look at how much training they've got. And if we say, here's what the supervised experience needs to look like, 1 year can be the internship, which is required. The other year can be whatever we deem to be reasonable supervised experience. And if that's all done by the time you get your doctoral degree, great, go ahead and go forward. We decided as a state association to move forward on that. A couple of states had done that prior to Ohio. We wanted to move forward on that in part because we did hear these terrible stories of graduate students who had enormous debt. And the problem was, if they couldn't be licensed immediately, they couldn't start making money, they couldn't work as a psychologist making money. Some places they couldn't get jobs supervised because without being licensed they couldn't be on insurance panels sometimes. There were a bunch of catch-22 kind of things. So we tried to finesse that by saying, okay, if you've got enough supervised experience, then you can be licensed, or you can try to get your license. We talked to the folks in Georgia, I think, who had a similar bill that they were working on, and one of the things that we learned from them is that was the importance of having all of the training directors involved in the process. So we took a page from their book and we had a series of get-togethers where we sat down face to face and said, here's what we're thinking about, here's why we're thinking about it, tell us what the implications of that are going to be, are you for it or against it, why and why not, and we worked out gradually enough consensus about the idea, and enough reassurance about the things they were concerned about, that we were able to move forward with their at least tacit endorsement. The training directors weren't testifying before the committees, but neither were they saying, we think this is a terrible idea, please don't do it.
Okay.
The primary concern was around things like, that last year postdoc supervisory experience, that's where people sign off. And now you're going to put us in a position that we have to sign off on these people maybe. And we aren't sure we've got the right mechanism in place to be sure these people are ready.
Okay.
I think it's a psychologist's trait often for us to say, well, it could be better, and it's not really quite ready. And so there's that piece, but there was also the piece of responsibility. And I wouldn't want to say, and the training directors didn't say, we're kicking it down the road, we're passing the buck. But there was a way in which, if that ever were involved, that would stop with those students at least who had had that much supervision.
At that point, okay.
So we got them involved, we got the students involved. One of the reasons that Jess got her Heiser is because we wanted to make sure that the graduate student voices were represented, and were represented with the legislators in testimony before the committee. So, and we saw in Jess Grayson one of those psychologists to be who had some potential, and so we wanted to get her involved and having a chance to see for herself and to develop some of those skills. So that's the way that one worked.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Going back to the organizational structure of OPA, I noticed that you were on a search committee for executive director
Where was it?
at one point, and was that at about the same time that OPA was looking at the structure, kind of shifting the structure, or how did all of that dovetail?
That was before the
Okay.
point that we changed the structure. So there was a kind of organizational cataclysm that happened around Henry Saman's tenure as executive director.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody's talked very much about that or not. I don't have all the history on that.
Yeah, I think that there are some interviews of people who will be talking about that, and
Right.
I believe that we also want to interview Marty Seaman.
Right, so one way to summarize it was we had gotten to a point as an organization that the thought was it would make sense to expand the organizational structure in central office to be more than a one-person shop,
Okay.
or a one-person shop with administrative support.
Okay.
And that was a difficult transition, and you'll hear from other people who were involved in that, I think, about some of the ways that played out. But there was, for a while, the prospect of a very unhappy separation between Henry, who had basically started OPA, who was the first. OPA was the first association to have a full-time executive director. So Henry was famous, and rightfully so,
Yes.
at the level of APA even.
Oh,
and he was a dean and mentor for many of the other associations and their executive directors who came along. So the point where it wasn't going to work so well was a very, very difficult one for people who both loved and admired Henry and loved and were concerned about OPA. So the long and short of it was, it did get sorted out, and Henry did retire, and OPA worked backward to fund a retirement account, which was something that hadn't been thought about at the time, because it wouldn't be like Henry to be concerned about himself. he was concerned about the association, and so looking back, that was one piece of what we finally decided was some fair way to do that.
Yes.
I was only just starting to get involved at that point.
Okay.
So I was less involved in some of those meetings for one reason or another. In any event, we had to fill that position, and I worked with, maybe it was Sandy Shulman and I.
Okay.
Again, I mean, those were during the time we were working together to do a systematic search for an ED.
Okay.
And that's when we hired, and at the end of that process, we hired Kathy French.
Okay.
I don't know if you ever knew her. She was from up around Youngstown.
Okay.
And her experience, I think she was a social worker. I might be making some of this up. But I know that some of her experience in the past had been around battered women's shelters.
Okay.
And so she
Okay.
had the right sensibility from our perspective. And so she was our executive director for a few years.
Okay. Okay.
But that was
Prior
in the
to.
continuing time of committee meetings, fairly late into the night. That would have gone up to 97 or 98, I think.
Okay.
And then I don't remember why she left. We had as an interim Nappy Hetzler,
Okay.
who is somebody that Michael knows because she's also involved in other kind of civic and sort of municipal and state governance things.
Okay.
So she was the ED. And I don't know if that was officially an interim position. I don't remember that.
Okay.
And it was in the wake of that, it was at the point that she was leaving, that Michael was hired. And so, again, somebody else can probably flesh that out, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So I was involved in that search, and we wrote a very careful ad and did a lot of paper screening, and then did some interviews. And
Interesting.
Candy's who we got.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. So that, yeah, and now it's interesting to me that hearing all of that organizational history, it seems that OPA is entering another period of possible tortured turmoil because we once again are looking at the organizational structure, and this time more initiated, I think, by the use of technology and people's honoring people's time and that
Sure.
sort of thing.
Sure. You know, I hope you're wrong. I hope it doesn't end up being tortured turmoil.
I hope so, too.
I think we're being proactive and thoughtful about it, and we've got a terrific crew headed up by Michael, but also a terrific crew of psychologists who are smart and thoughtful and so on. And I think a piece of it is the technology piece and honoring people's time, but I think a piece of it is when you look at the world at large these days, professional associations are having a hard go of it.
Yes.
OPA is more successful than a lot of our sister and brother organizations across the country. There are smaller places that don't have the resources or don't have the good leadership or haven't had the good luck or something. But the pressure on numbers, I mean, the average membership age is getting higher and higher. New psychologists are severely in debt, some of them as a result of graduate school. That's another piece that I was thinking about. You know, how do we help them?
True.
It's hard to get internships. That's another piece that's going on. But young psychologists don't have a lot of discretionary funds for professional association membership, and some of it is also a kind of generational contemporary posture, which goes something like, well, if I'm going to spend my money there, what am I going to get for it? And does that make sense to me? And is that the best use of my limited funds to do that? Don't just tell me I should sign up because that's what psychologists do, because that's not going to be a good enough reason for me. And I think that all makes sense.
Yes.
But it also requires that organizations like APA or like OPA, APA too, but OPA respond. And part of the response is to say, are there further economies of scale or structure or something that we can find by rethinking how we've got things set up and how we've got things organized. And so the balancing act, I think, that we're engaged in right now is how do we not lose the things that are valuable about the old way,
Yes.
And still make sure that OPA is nimble and responsive enough and also relevant enough that it will continue to have a robust and vigorous role.
Presence, yeah.
Because there are things that associations, groups like OPA can do that can only be done by groups. I mean, one of the things that I used to say when I was doing advocacy work as the chair of advocacy is OPA helps us multiply our voices and amplify our voices.
Yes.
You know, and there isn't any way that you or I, no matter how good an argument we have and how important an issue we have, that we can go down individually to the State House and get something done, because that isn't how the process works. It's not set up that way. And so to have a bunch of people, when we put the word out on the listserv, call up Janie Callender, that can have more of an effect
Yes.
than you or I with our good argument. I mean, one of the things I learned early is when you go to a committee hearing, everybody has an argument, and they all think it's good enough.
Yeah.
And at that point, the people who are listening, the legislators, aren't all that interested in whether your argument is a good one or not. If it's a bad one, that'll knock you out
I'll
of
note that, yeah.
That'll knock you out of the ring. But if it's a good one, that by itself isn't going to get anything done. So yeah, so I think there is that's a short version of the argument for there is a place, there's a need for groups like OPA.
Oh, yeah.
But we have to make sure that we stay relevant.
Yes. Yes. Well, this has been delightful. I wonder if there is anything that I have not asked you about in regards to OPA and its history within kind of the governance and restructuring, or advocacy for psychology that would be important for you to talk about before we wrap up the interview.
We covered a lot of ground.
We sure did.
I'm not sure what it would be. I guess if I wanted to say something for people who are coming along,
Yes.
it would be, I wouldn't want to leave a discussion without saying how deeply enriching my experience of being involved with my colleagues and my peers has been. I seldom fail in a year of my work at OPA to be moved and affected and encouraged by the work that people around me do. You really, I'm not sure that the way I would find a good therapist for my sister would be I would go and look at the board, because it might not be the right folks. But guaranteed there is always somebody from whom I learn something, and I almost always find out something unexpected and delightful about the capacities or the experiences or the drive or the passion that my fellow board members have had. And so that's been just a really cool thing for me. When I had my ABEP exam, which was back in the 80s, the one thing that I got dinged on was I wasn't very involved in anything that had to do with professional identity. Because that was before I had gotten started with any of this stuff. I sometimes think, ironically, well,
we'll have to send them this interview.
Got that taken care of. Fortunately, it wasn't a bad enough thing that it kept me from passing. But
isn't that fascinating? Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time today,
I really enjoyed talking with you.
Well, yes, and I think that OPA and psychologists in Ohio and the people we serve have really benefited from all of your efforts. Thank you.
Well, that's very kind for you to say that. And again, what happens with a thing like OPA is it brings out the best in people. And
Yes.
so I'm glad if it's done some of that with me. That's great.
Good.
But one more thing,
Uh-huh.
that I sing in choirs,
Uh-huh.
and most of this work, the advocacy work especially, is stuff you can't do by yourself. It's the choir that gets it done. There is this idea of the corporate body. That's what a choir is, and you can't sing a choral piece without the corporate body. And we're a version of that.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's a very cool thing too.
Yes. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.